Yes.
Girls, gays, thems, and theys, welcome to the Wrestling Podcast. Wrestlecast!
Yes.
I'm
Wrestle.
Lilith.
And I am Kyle, also known as Cody Powers in some circles, the CEO of Backyard Wrestling. Just out here kicking some ass.
And I'm just his girlfriend here to learn about wrestling. And that's exactly what we're going to do today, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to get into Wrestling Cast. We're going to talk about what is wrestling. For those of you who don't know about wrestling, same, I'm learning. And we're here to learn. We're going to talk about wrestling. How did Cody Powers get into wrestling? What drew him to wrestling? What stuff that we should know about wrestling if we don't know about wrestling? All those types of things. We're going to get into it. We're going to get deep into who is Cody Powers and where is Cody Powers going to be in like 5 years from now. We're going to figure it out. It's going to be awesome. So we're going to small talk for a little bit and then we're going to get right into it. But if you haven't seen our last episode, it's our intro. We still don't have a name for this podcast yet.
The No Name podcast experience. Because
Well, I've seen commenters say, like, let's name it the No Name Podcast. But the thing is that that's the thing. People have named podcasts No Name Podcast before. It's such an easy thing to do. And we thought about incorporating like our what's the word?
Nicknames, pet names.
Our pet names for each other. But I've also had people say the amount of times that I call Kyle Bubby distracts from the podcast. So I don't know. I'm still trying to kind of figure out where our name sits. But I also kind of want to still be able to incorporate Cody Powers into our podcast because it's so much of who Kyle is and it's important. And we'll get into why.
I think I just got a light bulb in my head, but I don't know if we'll save that for after the podcast.
We'll talk about it. Me and you will kiki about it later, Miss Thang. But yeah, the name is still in progress. I'm really hoping that you guys will come through in the comment section and give us some really great ideas. But we might not have a name for a while. It might take some time.
But that's okay.
Yeah, that's okay. It's definitely a work in progress, and I'm still thinking of new things. If you guys have stuff that you want us to cover, like I know we already talked about this last podcast, but we're going to be covering more things than just wrestling. We're really going to kind of manage it all. So if you guys have stuff that you're like, I want to listen to these two knuckleheads talk about this shit, let us know.
Send away.
And we'll figure it out. We'll do our research. We're already having people that want to come on the podcast and interview, which is really exciting. And I'm hoping that the more that we get into Wrestlecast, the more that we'll do that and have people come in and want to come in and talk and tell us their experiences. But I also want to have people come in and talk about mental health too and some other things. So if you want to be on the podcast, if you know us, and you have really good insight on wrestling, mental health, movies, whatever, or you just have something that you want to come in and be interviewed about, let us know. Comment down below. But yeah, today we're going to be talking about wrestling. I'm very new to the wrestling scene. It was never really my interest until I met Kyle. Kyle has been in it for a while, but let's get into it. How did you get into wrestling?
So I don't necessarily know like the exact like spawning points per se. But in elementary school growing up, that was kind of the talk of the town at the time. Back in the early 2000s, I was so there's different eras of WWE. I was in the quote unquote ruthless aggression era, which is about 2002 to I don't know what year it ends, maybe 2008ish. But that's kind of where I started. That's where John Cena, of course, everyone knows John Cena. Randy Orton, who's a very popular wrestler. Edge, who is someone I will definitely get into later. Well, Edge was an Attitude Era guy, but he carried over and he really started to get his big prominence as a singles guy during the Ruthless Aggression era. Um,
Why was it called Ruthless Aggression? What was the naming for the title on that?
so it was called Ruthless Aggression. I don't know if this is the exact. I have to double check my research, but uh, Ruthless Aggression was just the Attitude Era was like the late '90s, early 2000s, where they started doing kind of like more reality-ish things, where they were just kind of doing wacky, off the wall, fucking shit. Um, Ruthless Aggression Era was kind of like the coming down from that. The big like namesake that people will tout for that era is John Cena when he first made his debut in WWE. He came out to Kurt Angle, who is a very famous, popular wrestler, excellent wrestler, amazing dude. And he came out face to face with Kurt Angle, and I'm gonna butcher this because I don't know it off the top of my head. But Kurt's like, "What drives you, kid?" And John Cena just goes, "Ruthless aggression," and just fucking smacks the shit.
Gotcha. So you're saying like John Cena was like the poster boy for the Ruthless Aggression era.
Yes, but also at that time he so John Cena started off, he was very not milk toast, but like he was just kind of jacked dude that had like shorts on. And like he kind of would have got pushed to the wayside after that big moment if it wasn't for eventually he started rapping, and John Cena
Yeah.
rapping is what actually led to his career getting the boost.
Interesting. So for most people, when they see wrestling and they don't really know anything about it, they really just do see just like jacked dudes and tights
Yeah.
fighting each other. But what you got into it during this era, what pulled you? Why was it the talk of the town?
I think that's just kind of like it was very entertaining. You know, it's just people fighting on TV, and there was still a little bit of raunchiness, but not as much as the Attitude Era.
So
Um,
was it like scandalous? Is this why it was like the talk of your area
um, I think it's honestly, I think it was just what what the boys were into.
in school?
Um, yeah, and
So you were a young kid in school,
yes,
and this scandalous almost kind of reality TV show um platform was popular, and that's how you got into it.
yeah. I remember not being able to watch. So back then, and now it currently is like this now too. But it was on Mondays you'd have Monday Night Raw, and on Friday you'd have Friday Night SmackDown. I wasn't allowed to watch Raw a lot because it went on too late. Although one of my memories, and one of the famous, well, I don't know about famous moments on Raw, maybe more infamous, when I was growing up was Edge, who I believe was the world champion at the time, had a live sex celebration with his girlfriend Lita on TV. Um,
Live sex celebration, as in
so there was a bed in the middle of the ring, and they were just like under the covers.
oh, pretending to fuck.
Yeah, he like came out with like her underwear in his mouth, like it was cool.
Gotcha.
Edge's character is once he got to like on his own and kind of got to the main event level, was his thing was being the rated R superstar, um, which was
So I just want to draw this in for people who don't know about wrestling, are kind of like, what the hell when you're talking, or like, what the fuck? What do you mean? This, is more of a reality TV show than it is a contact sport. These are people creating dramatic personas and coming in to stir the pot and to get a rise out of people and to shock you. They're using shock value. Am I wrong?
not fully, no. So that kind of part of wrestling didn't really come up until the Attitude Era, where things started getting a little more Howard Stern, a little bit more Maury, a little more reality TV. And that's kind of where it hit its stride. Or at least
Is that what drew you in?
not necessarily. I think the action is something that's always going to be something that draws people in, because the wrestling, especially that era, there were a lot of, well, there's always been a lot of talented guys, especially in WWE, but that era of people, there was some really talented wrestlers. So there's people that watch it for like the storylines, and then there's people who watch it for the pure wrestling. So it's kind of like, it depends on the era you watch. But
Okay.
it's a little bit
So
of both.
what drew you in? Go ahead.
It's not solely just the reality TV kind of aspects, because the wrestling aspects is what kind of keeps it going. Because there's only so many times you can do the reality TV shock jock thing, until it gets kind of stale.
So it's balanced. It's rooted in contact sport, but it's amplified by reality TV show.
Yeah, and like going back to the '80s when like people like Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Crackhead, all the Ultimate Warrior, and like Macho Man Randy Savage and Ric Flair, all these wonderfully talented guys. Um, they were more just like larger than life superhero personas, and it was a little more simpler. It wasn't as like complex as it is now. It's just kind of like
Go ahead.
they know they have their, well, more Hogan. Their other Macho Man and all them were more talented wrestlers than Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan he's kind of but like they'd have like their big moves and they'd go slow with it, and eventually kind of the wrestling style evolved. And it's, if you like compare something from the '80s to something now, it's completely different.
So this started off as a contact sport and kind of went off the rails into a mix between a contact sport and a reality TV show.
Yeah.
How did you, when you were watching this as a kid, obviously you were interested in the action and started to be more interested in with the shock value, but how did you know that this is what you wanted? Like this is what you were captivated by? Like this was your thing. How did you know?
um I think in a way like the pageantry of it almost.
Pageantry, you say?
Yeah, like one thing that I've always enjoyed about wrestling is like the theme songs and entrances. That's one of my favorite parts, honestly.
So, how I learned about the general aspects and about wrestling, and like I said, I don't know much. I'm only learning through what I see Kyle do. Um, is it was easily comparable to things like Drag Race, to things like beauty pageants, to things like toddlers and tiaras type vibe, where these people are really putting on a persona and amplifying and dramatifying versions of themselves. And so you're having these people come in um almost like it's a beauty pageant,
The contact sport.
but for a contact sport, for butch burly men putting on like this music and strutting in and really getting a rise out of the audience.
I'd say that's fairly accurate.
Um
Some fans may not like that comparison, but yeah,
no,
it's
but it's true for someone who doesn't know, and for someone like me who's learned like things like Drag Race and beauty pageants. Yes, it's a weird comparison to wrestler fans who would have no interest in that. But that is where the weird thing that they have in common is it's a different kind of pageantry.
yeah.
It roots in the same kind of pageantry, which is incredibly weird because those are two totally unlikely things to have in common.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Um, so you've kind of told us a lot about what people should know who don't know about wrestling, but what is the main thing for people who don't know about wrestling? What is the main takeaway they should have?
Ooh, ooh, ooh. Um, I think at the end of the day, it's just like to take away from wrestling is just like it is this contact sport that people are putting their bodies and lives on the line for, but does have some kind of like more TV show elements. There was the video that was very popular and a lot of wrestlers watched it. called Wrestling Isn't Wrestling by Max Landis, who we don't talk about anymore, but that's besides the point. Where he kind of ended it with saying wrestling's kind of more a TV show about wrestling than it is a competitive sport, which is true in ways for sure. Especially from the Attitude Era, because you have these insane personas. Like you have the Undertaker, who is a giant satanic cult leader wizard. You have Stone Cold Steve Austin, who is a bald redneck beer drinking, say no to authority, flip off the authority figures, douse himself in beer, beat the fuck out of people. You got The Rock, who people know, who just would go off. The Rock, some people only know The Rock from his acting and not his wrestling, which is easy because he's the biggest man in Hollywood now. But The Rock's promos back in the day, he was a gift of the gods on the mic. Like, he is the pinnacle. And then like you had Kane's Kane's a good example, but he's the Undertaker's brother in storyline, and he's a fire demon man, basically. And then you just had all these strange personas, and they were just insane.
So that really answers my next question, which was about, is wrestling a sport or a reality drama / action show? And it really is both, you said?
It is definitely both. I think so. It's kind of leaned away from that recently because, well, partly because the internet wrestling audience is a little bit of ass. And they tend to care about the star ratings of matches and like, oh, how good is this match? Is this match going to be 5 stars? Which is complete and utter bullshit. Like,
what's the star rating based off of?
So there is a internet. There is a wrestling journalist by the name of Dave Meltzer, who I personally despise, because of the way fans have kind of interpreted his journalism, and he's also just kind of a shithead.
So he's sort of like a movie critique, but for wrestling.
Yes, and he'll rate matches, and 90% of the time, like if it's in Japan, it'll be 5 stars, but you know the same match in like America will be like, or specifically WWE will be like 3.5 because he's a biased shithead. But that's besides the point. My distaste of Dave Meltzer aside, he is a wrestling journalist, and a lot of internet wrestling community people kind of follow his word as gospel, and it's kind of poisoned the wrestling scene. The internet wrestling community is a very toxic place, as most communities online are, but it is a very toxic place because it's like, oh, this isn't 5 stars, and when's the last time WWE put out a 5-star match? This is just shit because
So
it's not 5 stars.
People are no longer basing it off of technical, physical wrestling aspects, charisma, storyline anymore. They're just basing it off of purely what some dickhead is saying with his pencil and his star rating.
Basically, but it is still so the way his ratings are more based on the technical aspects.
If you were rating it, how would you rate it? Like if you're basing a rating and you're rating each and every match, what would it be based off of?
I would completely ditch the star rating thing, because now it's kind of gotten to the point where wrestlers are like, don't care about telling a story. They're like, I'm gonna do all these cool flips, and I'm gonna do all these different moves together, and I'm gonna make it so acrobatic. Yeah, it's just like it, which doing all the like crazy flippy dippy moves and like all these insane like extra versions of wrestling maneuvers just kind of poisons wrestling in a way, because then it just, like, if you keep doing crazier and crazier moves and shit, you get to a point where you're gonna destroy your body, and people are just gonna be like, I've seen that before, and it's not worth it.
So, but what is your criteria? If you're rating a match, what's your criteria?
I think it is how much. So there are two characters in a wrestling match typically. There's going to be the babyface, which is the good guy, the hero, and the heel, which is the dastardly villain. You need the babyface to get the positive crowd reactions and the sympathy and the love, and you need the heel to be hated.
That's true. And that's something that I'm learning because Kyle has friends in wrestling, which we'll get into in later episodes and we'll also talk about in this episode. And he went to one of his friends' matches, to be a good friend of support. And he was sending me videos of the match. And this guy's in a professional match now. He's training to be a professional. And they finished the match and Kyle was booing his friend, and like me who doesn't know anything about wrestling, I'm like, why are you booing him? He did such a good job. And he was
Exactly.
like, you're supposed to boo him.
Yep.
And that was something really interesting for me. When I'm a very loud and extra person, which you will kind of pick up on more. You probably picked up a lot about it on the first episode, is I'm very in your face. I'm very overdramatic, but when I'm supporting my friends and family in any situation, whether it be a recital, a soccer game, whatever, I'm the loudest person in the crowd. So for him to boo, I'm like, is this a joke? But no, the bad guys need the boo.
Yeah, because the problem with wrestling now is it's kind of, the fans have focused more on they're a good wrestler, they do good wrestle moves, more than this guy is a dick and we need to boo the fuck out of him. Like there's the concept of a true heel that the fans just completely hate has gone out the window. Like there's certain people in wrestling today that fans do hate. And like that's why controversial thing, but there's a wrestler named Baron Corbin. So those of you who are MEBW fans, Jack Delta's least favorite wrestler, as he retired Kurt Angle. Baron Corbin is a true heel because he always gets the hate reactions. And that's exactly what you want. And people can be like, oh, he sucks. Baron Corbin's not good. But he gets the reaction more than most heels do. So I'm just saying Baron Corbin's like one of the best heels around right now because he actually gets the reaction and people actually hate him.
So before we get into some more specific stuff about your wrestling career and more of your opinions, I just want to kind of recap some of the stuff that you're saying, just in case for any of you who are still learning, still kind of hard to follow. We're really talking about, wrestling kind of being a mixed bag, and it's kind of forever changing, as we can kind of tell through different areas and what's good and what's bad. And I'm kind of learning how much wrestling is changing between being a tactical sport and a contact sport with being a reality TV show. And, we're going to talk a little bit more about Kyle/Cody Power's opinions on wrestling. But basically the summary is wrestling is a forever changing long storyline that it's constantly a new thing. So for you ADHD lovers of action movies who get bored easily, wrestling is the thing for you because it's never the same. It's constantly moving.
For sure.
All right, so let's get a little bit into what you do, who you are. We'll kind of lead into it. We'll start off basic. You're in a backyard wrestling community, correct?
I am the self-titled CEO of Backyard Wrestling, as I was the CEO of MEBW and now the CEO of WWA, and whatever other company will take me. Whatever company I buy. And I float around and I come out and I say, hey, you're going to have a match now. I am for you wrestling fans, I am the Teddy Long. He is he used to be the general manager of SmackDown growing up. He would come out and he would do his little dance. And then he would say, playa, you got a one-on-one match with the Undertaker. And that's Teddy Long's thing, is he makes tag team matches and he says one-on-one with the Undertaker.
So you are in the backyard wrestling community and you've been in it for how long?
I want to say my debut was in June of 2018, June or July of 2018. I joined, my first show that I had done for MEBW was I did commentary on Backyard Mania 2, which we don't talk about. Not my favorite moment at all. In fact, I'd rather not think about that moment. It was so okay. I'm gonna
You told me not to talk about it, but it's kind of my job to push you. So give me it.
Um. So, I this is my first show, and it is the biggest show of the year. It is our WrestleMania, um, and we get to the main event, and we need someone on commentary. Now, I had done commentary for like some joke videos that we had done, but doing commentary for the main event of the biggest show of the year with no experience and not really knowing the storylines going into it was a disaster. Now, luckily, before in like the beginning of the match, I was on commentary with Matt Thunder, who some of you know as Kyler Coleman, or Zach to some of you. And we were on commentary, but he had to leave commentary, and I had to be the sole commentator because he was about to come out and cash in his contract in the case, which I have in the background, which you can't see, but it's over there, that briefcase, which is a briefcase based off the WWE concept of money in the bank, which is you have a contract, you have a case, and you can cash it in whenever you want to get a shot for the world title. So at the end of the match, I believe Tyler Adams beat Tommy Gunn, and then Thunder comes out, cashes in. Gunn they all attack Tyler Adams. Thunder becomes the new world champion. But and they start a faction. So a faction is a group of wrestlers who come together, working for a common goal or whatever. And they started Rogue 4, which was not a long-lasting faction, but it was Jack Delta, Hunter Jones, Tommy Gunn, and Matt Thunder. And they Thunder brought out some shirts that said Rogue 4 on it. And I was like, what? He's got shirts. Yeah, it was not my brightest moment.
So not the greatest commentary, but it was your first go?
It was my first go, and it was
So,
nerve-wracking.
Kyle is something you might not know about Kyle is he's very off the cuff. He definitely, even in these podcasts, I'm like, do you know what you want to say? And he's like, yeah. And it's not because he prepared beforehand. No, it's just that he's gonna pull it straight out of his ass. And so that's probably what he was doing. And it kind of, I'm just trying to keep us on track here because we're already up to like 24 minutes. But he just kind of pulls stuff out of his ass, and he's I'm assuming in this experience he kind of learned that he couldn't really do that.
No, it didn't work out.
Yeah.
I got better at commentary eventually, but yeah, that was not my favorite moment. It was so bad that the company nearly ended.
Wow.
Yeah, I almost killed MEBW 2 years before we died.
Okay.
And like it was so bad that Tommy Gunn had to go inside and shave his head.
So, just to kind of still keep it educational for those who are still learning, I know we're getting into a lot of names, a lot of
Yes.
titles that people don't necessarily, at least my people don't know about. A lot of Kyle's wrestling fans already know the whole shtick, so some of this isn't confusing to everybody, but to some people it might be. You've been in backyard wrestling for a while, and you've been in long enough to know to kind of see some stigmas around wrestling in general, but also backyard wrestling. And I just want you to kind of address some of the most troubling stigmas in the backyard wrestling community, and how do you think it's possible to break out of those stigmas?
Well, okay, so backyard wrestling in itself is not officiated with like pro wrestling, and like I never claim that because that's what gets you in hot water. They are two completely separate entities. Pro wrestling requires you go to a training school, you learn the business, you come up in the business, and you're trained by professional wrestlers who have the actual training. That's not the case for backyard wrestling. Backyard wrestling, most of the time, is just some buddies going outside, fucking around, and beating the shit out of each other. And a lot of backyard wrestling really started. It had always been a thing in like fans of like Hulk Hogan back in the day and like the early 90s and all that, like backyard wrestling was always a thing because as a kid, as a wrestling fan, you go out and you fight your friends, you do cool wrestling moves on them. I have many childhood memories of like being in a swimming pool and hitting wrestling moves on my friends. Like most kids will do some kind of backyard wrestling, but filming it is a different kind of thing. But I think the real reason backyard wrestling has the negative stigma it does is because um, back in the 90s and it ended in very early 2000s, I believe 2001. There was a company called ECW. And ECW was a hardcore company. They would do there was a lot of hardcore weaponry, beating people with weapons, blood, all this crazy shit. Um, and people started being like, that's cool, I want to do that. And then they just started going in the backyard and hitting their friends with light tubes and barbed wire and all this nasty shit. Um, and post and then, well, YouTube didn't exist at the time, but posting it online to some way. Um, and that I think really gives a negative stigma because backyard wrestling has kind of shifted away from that. Um,
Gladly.
Thank God, because I am
Just
not a fan of light tubes. You know,
just
they
just speaking from a girlfriend perspective, when I first started, before I didn't even really know what was going on and what it was, I was obviously worried because it is easy just to see a bunch of kids get together in a backyard and throw each other around. And when you're with someone and you love someone, you get worried because you don't want anybody to get hurt. And, you know, you value people and you want to make sure that they're being careful, because the last thing I need to do is go visit Kyle in the ER every other week, right?
yeah.
Like, it's gonna happen regardless of the wrestling, just with how clumsy and chaotic he is. But like, let's keep it limited, you know. Um, but it's definitely, well, I'll let you explain how you've kind of stepped away from that and how to prevent situations like that.
Well, luckily, by the time that's not something that we in MEBW really did. Tyler Adams, who is a former MEBW wrestler, now a pro wrestler, um, doing his own shit, and he's all fully trained and everything, following the dream. Um, and backyard. So I want to preface by because I know there's like the big disconnect. Well, not disconnect, but I want to preface by saying that like a lot of wrestlers have started in backyard and then they kind of transition to pro. Um, that's just kind of the natural evolution point. It's not something that's touted out by the wrestlers themselves. Because like and it's starting to change a little bit because you have wrestlers that are pro. Matt Demorest, who's now retired, was a very popular backyard wrestler, and then moved on to the pros. You have people like Fuego del Sol, who used to be Cage and KBW, who works for like AEW now, who is not ashamed about mentioning his backyard past. But like there's a big stigma, and people don't really talk about their backyard past because it's like, okay, and it also depends on who your trainer is because some trainers are just like, yeah, don't talk about that. Don't talk about that. Like that's not cool. Um, and as long as you're not being like, I was a backyard wrestler around the locker room, you'll be fine. But like, uh,
So these professionals, what these professionals are worried about is looking like they are influencing young kids to go out and beat each other up on the internet, correct?
well, it's kind of that, and it's also kind of a safety thing, because there's a lot of aspects of wrestling. Wrestling is something, and like by saying this, usually I'd say this is exposing the business, but frankly, wrestling as a business has been exposed so much that it doesn't matter what I say on the internet. Um, there are many measures in wrestling that are safe. There's way to do moves that are safe and protect the performer you're wrestling with. And that's kind of the thing is, yes, you're in a combat sport, but you're also trying to protect the person you're with and not injure them because this is their lifeblood. This is their career. So if you injure them, they're losing money. And you do have to keep each other safe in the ring. And backyard wrestling, it's very much untrained kids. And if they do something like a pile driver and don't know how to hold on to someone right, you could have a broken neck. You know, a lot of these big injuries you could get by not being safe. And that's kind of why backyard wrestling's looked down upon, is because you're not trained. You're just some kid that's like, I'm going to do this. And that's why it's partially got the stigma that it does, is because you're untrained and you could injure the person you're wrestling with.
So what makes your company different and how did you step away from that?
So MEBW as a company was very much, we actually made an effort to kind of learn in the business, and we really kind of started a wave of backyard wrestling that kind of changed the system and kind of changed the style. And we got, I'm not going to claim at all we were anywhere near professional, because like the people that are now in the pro wrestling world have learned so much, and like they'll look back on even their best backyard matches and be like, wow, I didn't know shit, because they didn't. That's just how it goes. But you just kind of like, you don't necessarily have the so I'm wording wrong. I got this though. MEBW is different because we made an effort, and we had a lot of connections to people that are in the pros, and we made an effort to kind of learn from them and learn what the right thing to do was. And we also had a very different production style. Like, if you look at our videos compared to some other backyard wrestling, not many people were at the same production level we were. We made more of an effort to not be a pro company, because like I said, we'll never claim to be a pro related thing, because that's stupid. But to be something different than what backyard wrestling typically is.
So
um
you took backyard wrestling and you really elevated it.
I would fully agree with that, and that's the reason why we had the audience we did and the fans we did, was because we tried to do something different than the backyard wrestling community has really seen.
Okay. So let's get more into Kyle and what Kyle's interests are in wrestling. Before we start to get into some of the Cody Power questions, because I know you Cody Power fans are waiting and we'll get into it.
Oh
Don't
yeah.
worry. Who is your favorite wrestler of all time and why?
Okay, so this is kind of a difficult question, because as the MEBW boys will tell you, I don't watch wrestling. I do, but I don't. Um, I'm more notorious for falling asleep when we put on matches, but
That's
that's,
not just wrestling, Bubby. You fall asleep all the time. We could literally just be talking and you'd pass out.
yeah, it's because I go till I can't go anymore, and then I try to keep going, and then yeah. But I don't know what going to bed means. Um,
God, I know. Don't even get me started. And I'm like, Bubby, are you tired? And he goes, no. Like
yeah, that's
really.
accurate. But I definitely have my wrestlers that I've grown up and been attached to. As a child, I was a huge John Cena fan, as every child was, because John Cena was the big baby face, the lovable guy. Even though when he was in his rapper gimmick, his whole thing was he would just like make gay jokes and fat jokes about people, and it was peak good shit. Um, John Cena spit some fucking bars. Um, but yeah, it's a little sus to go back on, but whatever.
Yeah, let's just preface, we make jokes, but we're both two very accepting individuals. I'm a bisexual and very comfortable in my sexuality and very comfortable with other people's sexuality. Um,
Same.
Bubby is a straight noodle till you cook it. Um,
Everything
so
straight noodle till it gets wet.
any any jokes here are all simply just jokes and not meant to be taken seriously or offending anyone, just to preface that.
Yeah.
But as you were saying.
Growing up, I was a big John Cena fan. I was also a big DX fan, which DX is D Generation X, Shawn Michaels and Triple H, both legends in wrestling. Um, Shawn Michaels, one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. I think no, not many people would disagree with that. And Triple H has been a cornerstone of wrestling. He's the head of NXT now, and he's also the COO of WWE.
But
Um,
what is your favorite of all time?
all
You're
time.
listing some favorites. I want favorite of all time.
So I kind of go back and forth with myself between two people that were from the same tag team. and that is Edge and Christian. Um, Edge is multi-time world champion, of course, as I stated earlier, the rated R superstar. Had to retire 10 years ago, about came back in 29, the 29, I believe it would have been 2020 because it was just before the pandemic in January. The 2020 Royal Rumble, came back after what thought to be a career-ending injury after 9 years, and then won the Royal Rumble this past year. Uh, Main evented WrestleMania recently. He has always been one of my favorites, and he's just such a personality. His big rise was with the Money in the Bank, which I covered earlier, and he got the nickname the Ultimate Opportunist, and I've always kind of liked that, where he kind of picks his spots, goes for the kill when he needs to, and gets what he has to. And he's just versatile. He can be funny. He can be badass. He's got it all. Now, his tag partner Christian was always kind of a tag guy in the beginning. And then eventually kind of started to break out on his own. He won the Intercontinental Championship, which is a big title in WWE. It's not the world title, but it's the secondary title, and it's a very prestigious title. He'd won some mid card belts, but he'd never really gotten that big moment until he went over to TNA, which is a company that's still around now as Impact. But it was just kind of what was the leftovers from a company named WCW that folded back in 2001, I believe. It might have been 2002. I might have my dates wrong. But it was kind of the remnants of that. A lot of the people that used to work there ended up working in TNA, and he really hit his stride in TNA, and that's where he kind of proved that he could be a main event talent. And he ended up winning the world title there. Had a pretty sizable reign and had some great matches in there. And both of those are people that I've always been huge fans of. Christian's always been an underrated wrestler, a hugely underrated wrestler. And eventually he came back to WWE and won a couple world titles, but like they were kind of reigns because the back didn't necessarily believe in him, if stories are to be believed.
So we have an underdog, and then we have like a genuinely just iconic wrestler just kind of
Yes.
duoing together, and you can't choose between the underdog or the iconic
I
band.
think I would probably pick Christian out of the two, just because
You're an underdog guy, aren't you?
I do like my underdogs.
Yeah.
And he
So
always
we're
has
going to
been.
get into a little bit of wrestling promo stuff. First, before you talk about your favorite wrestling promo, can you just give me a short brief? What's a wrestling promo?
So wrestling promos are kind of there to hype up the match coming up. Um, Wrestlers will.
Advertisement.
It's hype. It's advertisement, basically. Yeah.
Okay, so what's your favorite?
Okay, so I had one that I was deadlocked set on, and I'm going to do that one as well. But there was another one that I've been thinking of recently. But the first one, so there's a wrestler named New Jack, and those of you who know me know I have a fondness for New Jack. Um, New Jack is, as some would say, insane. He has stabbed people in the ring. Yeah, New Jack, I would not want to fuck with. But back in the day, in the early '90s, during for preface framing this situation, this is the South, very white audience, which early '90s, the South. This is during the O.J. Simpson and the Rodney King L.A. riots. Um, Basically, he comes out and he's like just calling the fans like redneck racist fuckers, which and then uh it's he's got such an intensity in the promo, but there's one line that really sticks out to me, and that's a line that he says, I want to give a special shout out to my homeboy OJ Simpson. Two less of them to worry about. Keep up the good work. And that, yeah, and then he's just talking about. There was another really good line in that promo was violence to you people is putting someone in the figure four, which is a leg submission that's uh, old and popular. Violence for me is pouring gasoline on someone and lighting them on fire. So he's got very much the strong intensity.
Very dramatic, which
Yes, but that's
Really,
the life.
that's when we say dramatic, like over exaggerated, crazy personas, we really do mean over exaggerated, crazy shock value personas.
But that is New Jack, how he is in real life too.
Alarming.
Yes, it is. But I can't wait to meet him at the end of this month. It's gonna be so much
Yeesh.
fun.
Okay.
And then the other promo that I've been thinking about recently, because with the release of the Mortal Kombat movie and possible spoilers, they kind of teased Johnny Cage in the second movie. But this is video game things. And one of my favorite wrestlers, The Miz, has been petitioning to play Johnny Cage, which, as Jack Delta and I were talking about this yesterday, is the most me sentence he's ever heard, because The Miz, one of my favorites, playing my favorite Mortal Kombat character, Johnny Cage, would make me bust a nut in my pants.
Love that for you.
Yeah. And he had a promo back in August of 2016 on the post show for SmackDown, Talking Smack, and Daniel Bryan, who's another very popular wrestler, um, called him a coward, and he just completely went off. He's like, "You're gonna call me a coward? I've never been injured my entire time in wrestling, and then you said you were gonna come back after your injury and come back and get this title, but you're still retired. If you love wrestling so much, why don't you just quit and go back to your shitty bingo halls?" And he was just talking about how he's kind of been he's not a coward, and he's been holding
Yeah.
shit down, and he's never been injured. And that really kind of reignited his career, which is great. You know, he recently won the world title, even though it was for a short stint. And he's just been killing it.
So we're gonna get into who Cody Powers is and how he was born and came to be in a second, but I do want to preface for any of you who are lost, and some of these people are, at some point we're gonna do another Wrestlecast. This is gonna be a series where Bubby will give me a PowerPoint of different wrestlers, and we'll talk about who they are, what they look like. I'll probably roast to them a billion times because that is what I do. I do like making up random shit about however somebody looks. As a joke, obviously, we're a very accepting crowd here. But that's in your future. So for any of you who are lost, I don't know who the fuck these people are. We've mentioned so many different people, doing a Google search is kind of hard to take. But for those of you who are still learning like I am, we will go over some of these people in future episodes. But let's talk a little bit about your persona, and who is Cody Powers.
Well, before I debuted, I had always kind of thought what the character that I wanted to portray was something that was kind of, well, the best, I will say, to preface, a very popular adage in wrestling is the best wrestling characters are yourself cranked up to 11. And that's something that I very much like to do. Um, I'd always kind of wanted to do like a mix of like The Miz and Kanye West and like these just outlandish, like crazy shit, like Hollywood douchebags kind of. And I don't fully think I got there until I turned heel. Um, but I'd always kind of tried to crank myself up to 11 and just be me.
So when I said, and I know that for your friends, they're going to be like, Lilith, you're absolutely nuts. But I'm telling you, for those of you who have never seen a drag show, have never met a drag queen, don't know what any of that is, it is exactly the same for drag, but on the opposite end of the spectrum. Most of these men are finding these women that they find to be iconic, similar to Kyle creating Cody Powers, and taking a piece of themselves and those women and escalating them. So this is, and I know that like Kyle's friends are going to be like, you're nuts. I'm telling you, for people like me who watch nothing but divas and iconic drag shows and listen to powerful women in their free time. This is the closest thing that I can think of for me that I relate to that fits this. So you were taking some of your favorite wrestlers and pieces of yourself and forming them together to create Cody Powers.
Yes.
Explain to me Cody Powers' personality. Who is Cody
Um,
Powers' personality?
so I kind of go through phases. Um, a lot of my personal like character things is I kind of come at it like with a David Bowie mindset where I don't want to be like the same personality. Like I'll be in my thin white Duke phase, or I'll be in my like different faces of Bowie. And that's kind of what I've always wanted to do. Like when I turned heel, and like started the Lost, which is a faction that I created. Um,
A smart one, an incredible one. If you want to talk a little about that briefly.
I can, yes. So the Lost was a faction that I had kind of wanted to have, and it was me, Raylo Lentana, who is a luchador, El Gingy, who is another luchador, um, and Joe Erebus. And it was kind of the idea of the Lost was to take people that weren't necessarily um, given the spotlight and kind of underlooked and showing what they can do and that they are better than the perception that they have.
Big fan of an underdog.
Yes.
All
Um,
right, back to Cody Powers' personality. Ever changing, much like wrestling.
yes. So when I turned heel, it was very much like a obnoxious like douchebag that's just like fuck off, fuck you, shut up, bitch, fuck you, I'll kill you, um, and just kind of obnoxious. Um, and then when I eventually turned back to face, it was just kind of um, it was more just kind of me, just being me.
What
I
does that
would.
look like? People don't know you. You're on the internet. What does that look like?
That's a good point. Um, I I try to come out with a bit of grandioseness. I want all eyes on me, because
You're a star, Bubby.
I'm a star. Um, I want to draw the attention, so I will do some not outlandish things per se, but there's one of my favorite moments of just me being me on the product was there was a scene between or a build between me, Raylo Lantana, and El Gingy at the time, and Gingy and Raylo were getting face to face, and I was just Gingy kind of walked away, and Gingy was the heel in this scenario, and I look at Raylo and I'm like, "You gonna take that, buddy? You just go beat ass. You gonna take that?" And, just like starting to fire a little bit, but having fun with it, being a little comedian. I like being a comedian.
He's stirring the pot. He's funny.
I do like my yeah. I always try to be funny, but at the same time, because I am a jokester, a goofster, a gaffster. I like to be funny. Um, but at the same time, it needs to not take over the product. It needs to not be the only thing. It's just
Absolutely.
little salt on the character, like little entertainment.
Balance.
Yes.
Okay, so he's an ever-changing character. He's based off of you. He's based off of some of your other iconic wrestlers and favorite wrestlers. Um, how did he progress throughout his career? How did he grow?
Well, I started off and I kind of like had that like I didn't develop my personality for a bit, and I kind of eventually, as I kind of got a grasp of things and started getting into the flow, I'd kind of grow in personality. And then turning heel kind of refreshed my character, so I wasn't just like the CEO who like comes out and just is like, "You guys are gonna have a match, yeah." Um, and then I turned back to face, and I had my different character. And then once I went to New Jersey, I joined the faction in the company EBW called the Silence Era, which is kind of spooky dooky, scary horror. And my personality was psychotic in a way, as I am. It was very much based on my vocal inflections were secret for my performance. My vocal inflections were based on Darth Maul from the Clone Wars series. Not gonna lie, because he's got a very like aggressive kind of off kilter tone.
Mm-hmm.
I would just kind of act insane, I'd be in a promo and then I'd just randomly like drop to the floor and just start banging my arms on the ring and act like I'm a crazy person. Because in a way I am. And it was very much, the costume itself was something that I designed. It was very much based on like my interest and love of like horror and kind of strange design horror. Little bit of like serial killer with the mask and the apron, um, and a little bit of elements of like going
Serial
into some.
killer with an apron. Can we talk about that for a second? Just an off-trail ADHD moment. How do you take serial killer in apron? Like, is that like a thing? I mean, I don't
Um,
watch a lot of horror movies. How many serial killers have aprons?
well, like Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's just kind of like murdery, butchery kind of thing. It's based on like butchers.
I
Um,
guess, yeah. I'm just thinking, I'm like, what is he cooking? Oh, it's people. Woo!
and it was I have like a little image chart of like my inspirations for that, but I also was a little bit inspired by um, this character Alex DeLarge from one of my favorite movies, A Clockwork Orange, who's just this violent psychopath, but also has like a level of like intelligence to him, as most serial
Serial
killer
killers do.
psychopaths tend to have.
Mhm.
And I also there's little moments you can pick up if you look at me in the background, because I don't wrestle, I'm a manager. Um, of me like being around the ring, and even if the camera is not specifically directly on me, you can see my eyes staring directly at the camera. I kind of take that Stanley Kubrick like menacing, like face down but your eyes locked to one position, don't move it, kind of draw the crowd in, um, even if they can't necessarily see that you're the front and center, um, because it's intimidating. um, and then it's just been a balance of all that, and like where will my character go eventually, we'll find out.
I didn't even ask that yet. We'll get there.
Yeah.
We'll get there. But first, I want to talk about how your real life influencing. And I mean, you talked about this a little bit. A lot of your personality and your interests are influencing Cody Powers. And um, but can you just kind of tell me like what's the balance between like your real life and your wrestling career? Like where is that?
The line in Persona,
Yeah,
um honestly, I don't think there really is a line anymore.
alarming.
Yeah, I think I kind of you get used to playing a character. Well, the thing is, I don't consider what I would do as playing a character. I was just being myself. So the line isn't really there. Like when I'm doing like my silenced era thing, like yeah, there's a line, because obviously I'm not like a murderous psychopath, but like, well, I mean,
No, not at all.
um, but otherwise I'm just kind of myself. So there's not really a line there.
Okay. So we're gonna get into where you think Cody Powers is gonna be in 5 years from now. Are you thinking about going pro? Are you gonna take Cody Powers into being pro? Are you gonna give a new persona? What's your 5-year plan?
Well, pro is something that's always kind of shuffled around my mind. Growing up, I'd wanted to be a wrestler, and even now, I still kind of get the itch, because I like the contact, the physical contactness of it, and I like the physical aspect, because it's something that I could do that's physical, that I wouldn't like hate. Like, it's not like I'm like running a mile. Like, it's taxing, and it's physically taxing, but it's something that I would enjoy. Um, but as a manager, I've always kind of considered it. And of course, a lot of our guys are going into the pros, and more of them will eventually pop up. And I always get asked, like, will you be my pro manager? And I'm like, I would love to. I would really love to. As of right now, I'm gonna just do a few things in the backyard, and then eventually just kind of wrap up. And eventually I might go pro. I'm still kind of undecided. It's
It's hard deciding to go pro because it's not like it's a stable career.
yeah.
It's not like you can jump in and be like, yeah, and this is gonna pay for, my house. You're 22, you're working on growing up, moving out, and we could talk more about that in other podcasts, but it's an investment.
Hmm.
It's it's uh it's taxing on your body. You're giving your life to it. It's a big commitment, and I don't think people realize that.
Yeah, it's a very big commitment. It becomes your life, and you have to be dedicated, or else you're not going to get anywhere. Um, and yeah, like I said, I've always kind of floated the idea of going pro, and like I'm not going to say it's not going to happen. Like it might, but when, I'm not sure. Um, if it did happen, I would love to kind of bring back a group like the Lost, um, and kind of try to highlight the people that don't
Underdog.
have the uh, love that they deserve. I very much like to take people under my wing and just kind of like show them that they got this shit. Um, and I'd like to do that, and I think something like that would connect with the fans too, especially those fans that just kind of don't feel like they have a place. That's kind of my goal. That would be my goal if it went pro, is to kind of make those fans that kind of don't feel like they have a place to kind of feel incorporated into that group and just like really grow and like support that group. Um,
All right. Well, we're gonna have at least one more question, but just to preface, Cody Powers, he doesn't know where he's going at, but he, much like wrestling, is an ever-changing man and a fan of the underdog, and that's that's you, dude.
yep.
My very last question for you before we wrap up is, where do you see the future of wrestling going in the next couple generations?
This is gonna be a hot question. Um, I think wrestling's at a really weird spot right now. You have a new company like AEW, which is the alternative to WWE, and I have my own opinions on AEW that I won't get into because I don't have that amount of time. Um, but wrestling as a business is kind of not where it used to be. I don't know if it'll ever really hit the highs of like the Hogan era or the Attitude Era, or even like the beginning of the Ruthless Aggression era, um, because the wrestling community online has been so toxic and kind of devolved into the needing the 5-star matches and all this bullshit that's just like so not into like what wrestling should be. Um, and the current crop of like wrestlers that are the big pro wrestlers, like you don't really have the big stars, the household name stars anymore. Um, like if you look back at the Attitude Era and like the Hogan era, you had like Hulk Hogan, Macho Man Randy Savage, The Ultimate Warrior, Stone
Which
Cold,
everyone knows. I even know some of these.
yeah, Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, John Cena, like all of these huge, Randy Orton, all of these huge wrestlers that are big stars and have more of a pop culture synonymousness. Um, and you don't really have that with a lot of current day wrestlers. You just don't. And like, it kind of gets worrying because it's like, well, where will the business go? Is the business going to go into the shits? Like, where are we going to go? And it's
Is this your underdog to believe in then, right?
um in a way, I do hope the wrestling kind of changes for the better. And like I think character wise, like people like Roman Reigns in WWE, who's the current Universal Champion, which is the world title on SmackDown, also cousin of The Rock, um, is doing really good work, and he's being a proper heel. and being hated like a heel now. And like I think he'll kind of get there, but or if he's not there already, but um I am kind of concerned for wrestling. I do have a lot of hope for it though. And
All
hopefully there
right.
will be another reassurance, but
Anything to summarize what we just went over, Bubs, before we say goodbye?
um maybe not summarize, but support your local wrestlers, support your independent wrestlers. They bust their ass and they deserve some love. And just remember that just have a good fucking time.
Be safe, but have a good time.
Yeah.
All right. This was the first episode of Wrestlecast. In future Wrestlecasts, we'll get into more of the nitty-gritty of wrestling. We'll ask more questions. Obviously, Kyle is my co-host, and so we're going to be, asking other wrestlers questions and still hearing his opinions because he is the expert of this podcast. But I really hoped you'd enjoyed it, and I'm really excited to read your opinions on all of the great information and opinions Kyle gave out. And I don't know, the next time we're gonna do a WrestleCast, we'll probably scatter them out. But keep listening for other stuff, mental health, all sorts of other interesting things that we're gonna be talking about, movies, video games. And thank you for watching.
Yes, thank you.